There was a report done by McKinsey that said ensuring gender equality in the UK has the potential to add £150 billion to business as usual in terms of the GDP forecasts in 2025. It makes good business sense because it's all about reducing turnover. You're going to have increased absenteeism if people are being effectively bullied or harassed at work.
Hello and welcome to an episode of the Plumm Pod where we talk about all things HR and mental health. I'm your host, Georgia, and founder of Access HR. In today's episode, I'm joined by Chantal Cross, and we focus on legislation changes, specifically the new duty to prevent sexual harassment in the workplace. I will be adding a disclaimer to this episode. It doesn't constitute legal advice in any capacity. It is purely an education resource for our listeners. And also, one more thing, make sure that you like, share, and subscribe to this podcast. It means so much to us and it allows us to keep going with these episodes week on week. Chantal, welcome to the pod.
Thank you for asking me.
Honestly, this is such an exciting topic that we're going to talk about today. And I've got to give creds for this episode to Paris as part of the Plumm team because you were at a Plumm event. And this is exactly why we're here today, which is so exciting.
Yes. I've thoroughly enjoyed it. Best steak I think I've ever had. So, but anyway, I digress.
For our listeners, I would really love for you to set the scene a little bit. And there's a question that I love to ask every single guest, which is, was HR part of the plan or did you fall into it?
So I was about 25, 26, something like that. No, 24. Anyway, that doesn't matter. I was about 24 and there were people coming onto the market, younger than me, better qualified than me. And I just thought I need something that's going to be a career, really. And I started to look at accountancy qualifications and then realised that me and numbers just are not friends. And then my boss actually suggested HR and I talked them into sponsoring me for an initial sort of quite basic qualification and then just went from there.
How long have you been in the HR space?
Well, given that I'm only, 26,
2 years?
2 years, no, about 20 years plus VAT.
Amazing. And from where you were when you first started out at 24 compared to where you are now, tell me a bit more about the position that you're in at the moment.
So, world of difference, really. I mean, since 24, I've had quite a lot of experience in private sector, public sector, third sector, and mainly education for some reason. It's odd because both of my parents are also teachers, so it's weird. But yes, I got a lot of job satisfaction generally from helping head teachers with quite difficult and complex ER problems mainly. And then with my last contract, I just decided that ended. I was not sure that I wanted to stay in HR, so I went off and followed some shiny things for about a year. And then it was odd. We decided to set up a limited company, myself and my husband. And then this course came along that talked about moving from corporate to consultancy by Sarah Hamilton Gill. She's on LinkedIn. So I did that course, was really good. And then I did the subsequent sales course. And then this legislation came in. So it was all quite serendipitous. And I've always been very passionate about the whole reason I got into HR was to make sure people were treated well at work. You spend so much time at work. You just really need to enjoy it, really. So I kind of got into it for those reasons as well. Plus, it's really quite interesting, and it's challenging, and there's kind of a good career path.
I think what the really important thing is as well is there has been significant legislative changes, especially
Absolutely.
with the new prevention duty that's come into place. Would you mind telling our listeners why that came into place?
So there is an awful lot of evidence, literally everywhere you look, that it's a bit of a problem. I mean, you've only got to look at the news, haven't you?
Yeah.
But even before then, there's some technical guidance that the Equality and Human Rights Commission have put together. And they actually did a report called Turning Tables a few years ago. That really looked into the issues, was it an issue, I suppose? And they had actually found that 75% of respondents had experienced sexual harassment at work. And that's not an isolated report. There is plenty of evidence. There was also a TUC report in 2019, and they looked as well at how it affects the LGBTQ community, and 68% of them had also been harassed at work due to their sex or their gender reassignment, or so it's a big issue. It is a big issue.
If we were to strip this back for some of our listeners who may not have the knowledge or understanding of sexual harassment, how would you define that?
Well, it's defined in law. So harassment itself is actually connected to one of the 9 protected characteristics. So age, disability, etc. But sexual harassment is specifically to do with of a sexual nature. But there is a specific legal definition. It talks about unwanted conduct and of an unacceptable nature.
And also that's one of the main things with what we want as well from today's episode is that people understand the definition of sexual harassment. It is unwanted conduct of a sexual nature. And we do really hope that our listeners get some amazing tips, which I know from our conversations that we've had previously, that they absolutely will. The changes came in as of 26th of October, 2024. We've now moved more towards a progressive way with the new preventative duty. And as part of the duty, there is the requirement for employers to look at what's reasonable for them as well. There was talks previously around all reasonable adjustments and then reasonable adjustments, but now we've got further clarity, don't we, within the legislation and what that looks like. Are employers required to be responsible for all reasonable adjustments, or is it reasonable?
It's reasonable.
Yeah.
So they did a bit of the okey cokey with that, in out, shake it all about. But yes, eventually, I think it was just a drafting error, and they did clarify that in the end.
So what are the most significant changes in the new preventative duty, and how can they impact businesses?
So the main issue, the main change is that it's a proactive duty, and it compels employers to not just react when there's an issue, but actually look at their business organisation as a whole and look at how they can prevent it from happening in the first place. Obviously, what is appropriate for each business is going to depend on, who their customers are, what business they do, historical issues where the power imbalances are, personalities, the policies in place, and the culture that's developed.
I absolutely love that you've just said there that basically it's not a one size fits all. We can't be going in now after this new legislation with a blanket approach, it doesn't work. It's got to be customized for your business, for your demographic, because also the new duty extends to third parties.
It doesn't just at this precise moment, but I do believe it is coming in. It's planned within the legislation. But right now, there is no opportunity for a freestanding third-party claim. However, I always advise clients that you need to take that into account in any case, because it's coming. I think it's coming. It's also the right thing to do. It's like, why wouldn't you want to protect your staff from being harassed as part of their job?
You just started talking then about how employers can customize their sexual harassment prevention strategies within the organisation. Could you give me a few examples of what that could look like?
I think a good place to start really is a quite detailed risk assessment that is tailored to sexual harassment in the workplace. So you're looking at the policies you've got in place, who your employees interact with. The other thing to mention is that it's not just employees, it's wider than that. There's a wider scope, it's workers as well. And in some cases, it's self-employed individuals. So this duty is really quite wide. But as I was saying, the risk assessment is a good place to start. Because you can also look at reporting systems, whether people are lone working, pockets of power imbalances. And then based on that, you can also take that into, okay, so what does that look like for the business? What do we need to do as a result of this? We know there's a risk here because Mildred is working late on a Friday night and has all these truckers, I don't know, coming in.
That's the reality as well. And one thing to really take away from this is it isn't possible to do a one size fits all. I know we've already spoke about that, but there are so many measures that employers and people leaders can be putting in place as part of that prevention. You spoke then around risk assessment. Is there anything else that you would recommend as a tip?
Well, the other really big thing, apart from sort of obviously customising your training, is really to look at your staff. Your staff will know what's going on. So if you're not already doing a staff survey, then you need to be looking at that. I mean, I've had some really odd comments. So one client I heard had said, but we haven't had any reports of sexual harassment, so why do we need to bother with this? There's significant evidence that people do not report this because they don't think they're going to be listened to. They are concerned about the impact it will have on their career, as well as it's not very nice to actually have to talk about it in the first place. There's so many reasons why people don't report. You've got to make it easy for them and you've got to remove the barriers.
I am so glad that you've mentioned this because the percentage of people who don't come forward for a lot of reasons is significantly high, and there is no invisibility cloak that will stop you from experiencing sexual harassment in the workplace, regardless of your size, your industry. Nobody is immune to it. And that's something that I also get a very similar response to the one that you had, where potentially now, because working dynamics have changed, we're not always in the office and people associate unwanted conduct with physical engagement and physical interaction. The way that the world has evolved, we have social media now, which has created a whole different ballgame of communication and unwanted contact. It doesn't have to be just physically touching somebody. There are other forms as well that are simply unwanted.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you could even, and what I was saying earlier on is this duty is so wide because you could actually just witness behaviour that creates an intimidating environment for you. There is some case law whereby individuals were known to be downloading porn in an office, and there was a lady working in the same office as them. She knew they were downloading porn. They never showed her it. She never complained about it. But that was a legal challenge afterwards because it created a hostile and intimidating environment. If you overhear something that you find offensive, if someone gives you a compliment, that could be taken the wrong way. If you start off with banter and you know, everybody's having a laugh and everybody's laughing and it's all fine until it's not. Now, I'm not saying we need to just cut the banter because, oh my God, we do need to have a laugh at work, don't we?
Gosh, yeah, we do.
I think the advice really is to just stay away from protected characteristics, you know, like age, sex.
I completely agree. And as part of that, with the new preventative duty, employers and people leaders need to be taking ownership of the comms around what's acceptable as well within the workplace. With the shift on technology, we are using more social interactions for quick communication like Teams, Slack, all of those channels. And within those, people can send emojis, people can send memes, which may not be acceptable in somebody else's opinion, because it's no longer just about how your intentions were when you sent that as well. And I think that's also really important.
Yes.
And we've got to raise awareness to our teams and our people leaders of the reality of that.
Yeah, they don't really care what your intention was. I think there was a case I just came across where there was some legal challenge where a boss was sending peach emojis. Can't remember the name now, but I'm sure it'll come to me at some point.
And that's a perfect example as well.
Yeah, absolutely.
Because if anyone's in the emoji world, we know what a peach stands for. In your opinion, what would you say are the essential components that an employer should be thinking about when they're trying their preventative duty? The reason I asked that question is I have done a little bit of research on you, and I know that you've got your toolkit, if you'd like to share a bit more on that.
So the essential components, that's a really difficult one to answer actually, because so much is going to depend on the type of business, the size, how much work they've already done, if there's any specific risks or hotspots but what you want to be doing is actually really, you know, there's the obvious things like the training and the policies and how you engage that. But this duty, as we've talked about, is slightly wider. So I would say just get started with a risk assessment. That would be a good starting point. There is case law also to suggest that this isn't a one shot and then you're done in terms of training either. It needs to be regular. So, for example, a couple of my clients are multi-academy trusts, and I think they're sort of a step further on than other businesses because they're used to delivering safeguarding training annually, for example. So I think that they could introduce it that way, but it does need to be regularly updated.
A key part you mentioned there that your clients has already started to build the habit with their training. For a lot of organizations, they don't have the infrastructure for that. And a key piece with this legislation that we should have been doing before when we had wind that the legislation was changing, and absolutely something that we should be doing now, and I'm sure you'll agree on this, is starting to build better habits in how do we raise awareness and education to our team of how to report unwanted conduct of a sexual nature if they experience it themselves, but also if they identify that as a witness. And you mentioned as well that we should make it easy for reporting, and unfortunately, allegations haven't necessarily come to light in the past, and potentially not knowing how to raise those could be quite an influencing factor on that.
Absolutely. And there's several approaches. I mean, you've hit the nail on the head. Ultimately, we need to, it's a cultural piece. We've mentioned that before. So we also need to look at how, on a scale of 1 to 10 in your culture, how comfortable are people reporting things, and how confident are you in taking action? Are you also making notes about where there are near misses? So a really good indicator of a brilliant culture that we're all striving for is whereby a female colleague reported that a male colleague wasn't really giving her enough space. She didn't feel it was harassment, but it kept sort of happening, and she felt uncomfortable. So the manager sort of said, well, how would you want it dealt with, and can I have a word with him? And she said, yes, of course. So he had a word with him, and absolutely reacted very positively, and was, oh, I'm glad you told me, and can we have a chat? And they got together and they talked about it, and then they moved on. And that's an example of where we all want to get to. And if you're not there, then how can we get you there? So the toolkit that I offer actually saves you probably around 90 hours of work. And it's everything I could think of. It's written in conjunction with a leading employment law barrister, and it includes 2 policies. I've also significantly expanded the training. So I put in a 23-page step-by-step guidance for managers. I tailor the training. I do posters. I've written comms so that you can send out to staff in inviting them to the training. I've got comms for third parties that you can send out as well. And also a quiz as well that follows up the training, that tests the knowledge. So then you can then look at any gaps that remain. If you look at the Equality and Human Rights Commission, they have like a wheel, a process of what you should go through in terms of looking at your culture. So that actually ticks off one of the areas amongst others in terms of checking the knowledge, because again, it's not a one hit and you're done. How are you reinforcing it? How are you engaging your staff? So I do literally think of everything, because I'm pretty much living and breathing this right now. I'm so passionate about it. I think it's so important that everybody feels safe to come to work. And it's a no-brainer in terms of productivity and the impact on that.
Tell me more about that. So when it comes to addressing workplace sexual harassment and putting the preventative measures in place, what are the potential impacts that we can see on productivity and the company culture as a whole?
So the rewards for this are potentially very, very significant. There was a report done by McKinsey that said ensuring gender equality in the UK has the potential to add £150 billion to business as usual in terms of the GDP forecasts in 2025. It makes good business sense because it's all about reducing turnover. You're going to have increased absenteeism if people are being effectively bullied or harassed at work or don't feel comfortable doing what they want to do. Even if they're turning up to work, do you think they're really going to be productive? If people do leave, then that places more pressure on other staff. You've got increased recruitment costs. Bystanders perhaps feel helpless and disillusioned and anxious, and then they're going to start talking. It's increased risk as well, financial risk. This comes under discrimination. So the financial penalties are uncapped. And if you can't prove, if you can't stand up in front of a judge and say, this is what we've done, this is what we did to prevent it confidently, and prove that you took reasonable steps, then they can uplift that award by 25%. Now, the other interesting thing that I found is that tribunals will take into account the resources available to you as a small organisation. They will. However, when it gets to the sanction side of things, they won't. They have they have the vento bans and other mechanisms to deciding how much that organisation has to pay. And they will not take into account whether you can afford it. So you could bankrupt your business in one easy swoop. And I don't mean to scare people, because honestly, it's not rocket scientist. I do it. It's not rocket science. I mean, if I can do it, it's definitely not. And for a tiny, tiny amount, we can do this cultural piece that will actually make your organisation more profitable. So why wouldn't you do it?
I am banging that drum with you at the same time. And a really important message and takeaway is an allegation or an individual's unfortunate circumstance of unwanted conduct isn't just in silo. It isn't just that one scenario that's happening. The impact is very significant, regardless of the size of your business. Nobody is immune. And where the new duty comes in is that extra responsibility that employers have. And it's not a choice to ignore this and have the response of, well, it's never happened to me. It's, we're all friends here. It will never happen. We've never had things like that before. With businesses, it is people, basically. And that's where we need to be more proactive, exactly what you've just been saying. And I absolutely love that, to build a healthier culture and a psychologically safe culture as well.
Absolutely. The other thing to mention is just how wide this duty is. I was on a networking meeting once, and this chap asked me what I did, so I started to tell him, and he said, "Oh, that won't apply to us because we're all blokes at my work."
Oh dear.
And it's like, I don't know where to start.
That's a really big misconception, though.
It is very much so. So let me give you an example. So one of the cases that I go through on the training is, so I'll give you a sneak preview, is, and this, bearing in mind, this is before all the legislation came in. So there's a chap called Mr. English, and he worked for Thomas Sanderson Blinds. He'd been there a number of years. The interesting point on this is that he was an agency worker. So he wasn't an employee, but he'd been there quite a long time. He lived in Brighton and he'd been to public school. And his manager started teasing him about being gay. Now, Mr. English was not gay. There's nothing wrong with being gay, but he did not have that protected characteristic, as it were, in terms of sexual orientation. He was happily married and he had 2 kids. And he also knew that his tormentors knew that he wasn't gay. So it went all the way up to the Court of Appeal. And he was found to have been harassed at work. And that was back in 2008. You asked me earlier, actually, you were asking me what can small businesses do to tackle this? Where do you start? And it really is with managers, because actually the vast majority of the harassment starts with the managers. They're in the business, they can see the behaviours that are happening, and they need the tools to be able to deal with them.
Such an important point there as well. And with that case, it's a perfect example that although you gave a really amazing statistic around 50%, it doesn't necessarily have to just be a male with a female who most of the time is more junior in their role. It can be the reverse. And there are quite a lot of case law examples as well of when that has happened. Unfortunately, there are also quite a lot of cases that are in the media at the moment as well, which is sparking the conversation around sexual harassment. And for our listeners, this has essentially come in because of the new duty that's come in as of the 26th of October, 2024. What advice would you give to any business owners who may have already started to implement the preventative duty and any anti-harassment measures, but on very surface level, they've done what they think they need to do? What advice would you give them to go that extra mile?
To be honest, give us a call. Love a chat.
Yeah.
I'm always happy to have an informal chat with business owners. But it's really difficult to answer that question, if I'm honest with you, because like I said before, it's tailored to the business. But you can hop on and look at the Equality and Human Rights Commission technical guidance. That's really good, but it's massive. And it will take you quite a lot of time. I mean, so I honestly think that it's most cost effective just to get an expert in like myself, if I'm honest with you, because it will save you time and anxiety, and you'll know that I've done all the hard thinking for you.
For our people leaders as well who are listening, a core part of this is the prevention side. We've said that word so many times on this episode as well. And firstly, looking at what you're doing already, what's working, what isn't, what are the gaps that we're identifying, things like when was the last time we updated any of our policies, disciplinary, grievance, social media? Are we up to date with the advances of the world? Consider things like that, and taking this seriously.
Yes.
At the same time.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, you need to take this very seriously. And whilst there is a focus on the prevention side of things, how you react as well, if a complaint does come to light, will also be taken into account. So going back to your point about it's not always, men harassing women, it is overwhelmingly men harassing women. However, is case law about the reverse. And it could literally be one or two incidents. So there was a case called GOH v. Asda, whereby a male employee complained that a female employee, I think, had kicked him twice or something. And it was shockingly badly dealt with. He was not kept up to date. He made a complaint and then they didn't do anything about it. And then I think he had to raise a formal grievance and then they didn't keep him updated. And I think he felt that it just wasn't being taken seriously.
Very wise lesson to employers about the severity of this.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that cost them about 30k.
Wow.
And if you think about going to a tribunal, yes, you probably settle beforehand or whatever, but you're probably going to need some legal advice. If you choose to fight it, you're probably looking at 50,000 roughly for a three-day tribunal hearing.
As a minimum as well, I think, with it being uncapped.
No, that's just to fight it.
Oh,
That's just to fight it. So getting the legal advice, the loss in management time, the stress, the impact on productivity. And then, there's a
lot to consider is a very big message from our conversation as well.
Yeah, I honestly, I don't want to scaremonger. I really, but it is what it is. And there's a very simple solution. Have a look at that technical guidance. Do your risk assessment, do your staff survey. You'll get an awful lot from that. And if I can help, great.
Thank you so much. One final question that I've got for you. Looking back on your career, what is one piece of advice that you wish you could give your younger self?
If I'm honest with you, I probably would have not done HR. I'm glad I did now, because I'm doing what I feel passionate about, and I really feel like I'm making a difference. But actually, I really wish I'd done something a bit more arty.
You are very creative.
So yeah, I got into resin art in lockdown, and before I knew it, I mean, I think I've got suspected ADHD, but before I knew it, I had a YouTube channel with 160 odd videos. So
the thing is as well, with HR, we don't have to remain in a box. Like, I'm incredibly creative as well with the way that I practice HR. And that's the beauty of it. I do think that we can pull on our creative outlet.
Definitely.
And bake that into what we do as HR professionals.
I am loving creating my marketing materials. Canva, I just love. I've had to buy the professional version.
It's my best friend too.
I can lose days on that. I'm telling you.
Chantal, thank you so much for joining me on today's episode. I know talking about sexual harassment is a particularly sensitive one. Today is all about being brave with our conversations that we're having, and I've had such a good conversation. I know our listeners are going to have such valuable takeaways. So thank you so much for joining me, and let us know what you think of the episode, guys. Do you have any questions? And thank you very much.
Thank you.